Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. This story is going to be relatively quick. I follow Julian Assange news, and so this was news that came up from on the radar for Julian Assange. By the way, if you guys enjoy the content and you find yourself coming back here often, please consider supporting the content either through PayPal, Patreon, or even at this point the show is monetized, either through super chats. That said, let's get to the news story. So, if you remember, The Guardian ran a piece. Luke Harding, who was dismembered by Aaron Matei on Real News Network, even though he wrote the book on Russian collusion, couldn't make the case for Russian collusion. Luke Harding has been putting out stories fed to him by the intelligence services, and the one that he put out recently was utterly absurd. And it was nailed as such by various outlets, including my own, saying that this story is nonsense. There is no record of, his point was that Manafort met with Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy, even though there's no records of this. He was fed something in intelligence services, and you have to take his word for it through anonymous sources. It was so bad, and it was so flagrant, that a CIA operative put out another story saying that Luke Harding might have been fed false information by the Russians. It was nonsense. That makes no sense. I mean, that's utterly insane. It makes more sense that the Ecuadorian embassy or Ecuador or the United States that wants to eject Julian Assange fed Harding information because they knew he's into the Russiagate conspiracy theory, and he would run with that information, seeing as all of the other information ran in the same direction. And in running with that information, put out what they considered to be a bombshell, even though it fell flat when everybody started looking at this and kind of taking shots at this, trying to create a link between Trump and Russia. Because after all, he's the guy that wrote the book on collusion that hasn't been able to show collusion. That said, the news story came out in the New York Times showing that Manafort tried to broker a deal to get economic relief or to get money to Ecuador from investment in order to hand over Assange. Essentially, he was trying to create a deal. Initially, the deal that he went with the Ecuadorian embassy, he was trying to pay his debts. Apparently, he had a ton of debts. And in trying to pay his debts, he was trying to work to get a deal between China and Ecuador, where they would invest in Ecuador. This turned into talks on Julian Assange because Assange was a sticking point. Now, these talks turned into Assange. He met with the Ecuadorian governments twice. Now, the catch here is that these talks didn't go anywhere because Robert Mueller was soon appointed, and when he was soon appointed, it was clear that he was the target of an investigation. But that story is amazing. The wild part about the story is that if this story is right by the New York Times, are we to believe that the invisible cloak that Manafort has possession of, that he went to see Assange with, that in those talks with Assange, he was talking to Assange in order to hand Assange over? So he was going to the Ecuadorian government trying to come up with some deal to get Assange kicked out of the embassy and handed over to the United States. But he was also going to Assange. What was he going to Assange for at that point then? It makes more evidence that the other story doesn't make sense. But again, that's assuming that the story is true. Let's read part of this. The top part gives the entirety of what's being said. In May 2017, Paul Manafort, facing intensifying pressure to settle debts and mounting legal bills, flew to Ecuador to offer his services to a potentially lucrative client, the country's incoming president, Lenin Moreno. Mr. Manafort made the trip mainly to see if he could broker a deal under which China would invest in Ecuador's power system, possibly yielding a fat commission for Mr. Manafort. But the talks turned to a diplomatic sticking point between the United States and Ecuador, the fate of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. In at least two meetings, Mr. Manafort, Mr. Moreno, and his aides discussed their desire to rid themselves of Mr. Assange, who has been holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London since 2012 in exchange for concessions like debt relief from the United States, according to the people familiar with the talks, and details of which have not previously been reported. They said Manafort suggested that he could help negotiate a deal to hand over Assange to the United States, which has long investigated Mr. Assange for the disclosure of secret documents and which later filed charges against him that have not been made public. Now, how do you know they made him? Like, clearly they were made public if you are... Never mind. Within a couple of days of Mr. Manafort's final meeting in Quito, Robert Mueller was appointed as special counsel to investigate Russian affairs in 2016 election and related matters, and quickly it became clear that Manafort was the primary target. His talks with Ecuador ended without any deals. That's the story. That's the story. He was trying to get Assange kicked out of the embassy in order to create a fat paycheck for himself in order to pay off his legal bills. Again, what did he don his invisible cloak for? To go see Julian Assange in the Ecuadorian embassy where there was no record of this at all. What did he use that invisible cloak for, to see Assange for, if he was trying to get the government of Quito to kick Assange out of the embassy? You don't need Assange for that process. What you need is the Ecuadorian government to have a change of perspective or something to that effect to trying to get him out. I guess I make the point, it just makes the other story in The Guardian look that much more ridiculous. The fact that there wasn't really a record of Assange in this case. Craig Murray kind of made this point strongly, extraordinarily strongly. And beyond there not being a record of this, everybody, WikiLeaks opened charges on this, like a libel charge, saying that he was outright lying in that story. And Manafort has completely denied that particular story, saying all of this was nonsense. Didn't stop The Guardian from running that story, and didn't keep Luke Harden from being seen as a legitimate article writer. All right, I'm not going to use the term journalist because I don't think being a stenographer is journalism, especially for intelligence services. All right, I will end this here. It's like 1:30 in the morning here, so I'm not going to stay too long. Elizabeth Voss wrote several good pieces on this. Yes, she is very good. She's been on the show often, actually. She's pretty badass. Trina Be Fine, I was just watching your previous vid. Well, thank you for your support, Tina. I appreciate you watching. WikiLeaks obviously isn't scared of discovery. No, they're not, because everything they put out is honest. I mean, they've never been found to be wrong. In fact, their credibility completely depends on the information that they put out being legit. Otherwise, you can use it to smear the organization. People try, but the fact of the matter is the track record of the organization speaks for itself. They've been correct in the information that they put out. Intelligence services don't like it. People in power don't like it. Yes, but if you're talking about the masses, Hillary supporters hate it. But people who care about knowing what their government is doing, what international government is doing, knowing what money is doing behind the scenes, particularly when it's against their interests, those people support them. So, not to mention, again, everything that they've ever put out has been correct and honest. I'll leave this one here. If you enjoy the content, please consider supporting through PayPal or Patreon. Like my wife says, even $1 helps. Thanks all.